Okay, so I've just finished watching Fury versus Wilder and also Felder versus Hooker in Auckland in the UFC. And man, I'm absolutely pumped, but I'm also an emotional wreck because if you just watch Felder versus Hooker and you're not, there's something wrong with you. Plus, I've also had about 6 cups of coffee already, so I'm pretty jacked up. So let's get right into this. So I'm going to start with Fury versus Wilder, and that's not because I enjoyed one or the other more, because I thought it was a great night for combat sports as a whole. But I'm going to start with the boxing because it was technically a bigger night. It was a huge fight. Tyson Fury stopped Deontay Wilder in the 7th round of their fight in Las Vegas, and man, I was incredibly impressed with Tyson Fury because going into this fight, there was a lot of talk, especially from Fury and his camp, that he was going to go in there and stop Wilder. And I think a lot of people just thought that was Tyson Fury being Tyson Fury because let's be honest, I love Tyson Fury and I love his public persona, but he talks a lot of nonsense. Case in point, look back when he was talking about potentially having a fight in MMA and he said that he spoke with Conor McGregor and Conor McGregor would be training him for the fight. And then later, Conor said, I've actually never talked to Tyson about it, but you know, Tyson's great. So yeah, coming into this fight, Wilder versus Fury 2, I thought, yeah, Tyson's talking about a knockout, but really he's just going to box and move like he did in the first one. And not that there's anything wrong with that, I thought that would have been the smart game plan. But let's give Tyson a lot of credit because right from the get-go, right from round 1, he was sitting down on his punches and he was looking to land a knockout blow. I mean, he was still boxing well like he always does. He was using his jab, which was very effective, and that was called out on the commentary. But I think that his most effective weapon in the fight was actually his lead left hook. Sometimes he landed it and it was called out as a jab, but it was actually a lead left hook, and I think that was the one that was really causing damage to Deontay Wilder early and even late. And when I went back and I rewatched the first round, I honestly think that Wilder probably had a similar thought that we had, and by we I mean the people who thought that Tyson Fury was maybe talking a little bit of nonsense when he said he was going to go in there and try and knock out Wilder, because I think Wilder was pretty surprised how offensive Tyson was right from the get-go. But when the second round came about, Wilder got a little bit more, I guess, funky or unorthodox or whatever you want to call it, the way Wilder normally boxes, and he was actually starting to be more effective offensively himself. He was landing some good shots, but it was just crazy to watch because Fury was winging punches like Wilder normally does, and I just didn't expect to see that despite Fury's rhetoric going in. And then the knockdown came from a break in the clinch in round 3. Fury landed a beautiful rangefinder left right hook combination that dropped Wilder, and it looked like Wilder was a little bit upset with something. I'm not really sure why. Maybe he thought the referee didn't call action back in. I'm not really sure. But yeah, on the commentary it was called out as a left jab right hook, but it was more so just a rangefinder. It wasn't really a jab. He just touched him with it, but it was beautiful. Knocked him down on his ass and got a count. Then there was a few times where we saw Wilder on the floor again, but they were counted as slips. But then we saw one particular adjustment from Fury in round 4, which I thought was particularly effective, and it was when he started hitting to Wilder's body. But then Fury also starts smothering his work somewhat from round 4 on, but that might have been a tactic, and obviously in the end he won the fight, so he can't critique it too much. But he was smothering his work a little bit, forced himself into the clinch. But honestly, if you look at how Wilder has fought his last few fights and how dangerous he is even when he's losing a fight, I'm not surprised that Fury wanted to keep a safe distance, either all the way out or all the way in a clinch position, to maintain his lead and ensure he didn't get caught with something silly. I also noticed that the referee, Kenny Bayless, was allowing a lot of clinch work, more than you'd probably normally see in boxing, and I honestly think the reason for that is because he was finding it difficult to control these guys. Eventually he started warning about the clinching, and mainly warning about the shots in the clinch when he was trying to break the guys, and there was some consequence from that a little bit later when in the 5th round the referee took a point from Fury, who landed a shot when the clinch was breaking. And let's be real, it was warranted. It was a shot on the break, but also if we want to continue to keep it real, Wilder was landing similar shots as well, so you know, whatever. It didn't affect the fight in the end. Tyson continued to be aggressive, especially in close quarters, and then eventually in round 7 we saw the finish. Tyson cornered Wilder, landed a lot of shots, a lot of unanswered shots, and the referee stepped in. Originally, I just thought the referee stopped it, but then we saw that the corner, Wilder's corner, actually threw in the towel, which I thought was a good decision because, man, he was taking a lot of punishment. And also, something I actually didn't touch on earlier, in the first knockdown, it looked like Wilder potentially had his eardrum burst, which of course would have threw his equilibrium all over the place. And it seemed throughout the fight that he was quite shaky on his legs, although after the fight he did mention something about a leg injury going into the fight, so there is that. And I don't want to kick a man when he's down, and I give Wilder a hell of a lot of credit for staying in there and taking so many big shots. But I always think it's funny when post-fight the loser says, no excuses, I'm not going to make any excuses, but I had this injury, but no excuses, but I also had this injury. And that's kind of what we saw with Wilder. Again, if he had those injuries, fair enough, but don't say no excuses. If it's an excuse and it's a legit excuse, whatever. I'm not going to dwell on that though. Lots of respect to Deontay Wilder. And then we got Tyson Fury's obligatory post-fight concert where he sang American Pie, which is brilliant as always. Tyson's a lunatic. So yeah, great fight, big night for boxing, and phenomenal performance by Tyson Fury. And he proved a lot of people wrong with that showing. The consensus was if he was going to win, he was going to win on points. But he went in there fighting almost like a Deontay Wilder, looking for a finish. And man, I was super impressed with him. And thank you for the post-fight concert. It's always appreciated. What's next up for Fury? I'd love to see the Joshua fight. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. It looks like it might be a Deontay Wilder rematch. I'm not so sure it would go any way different than this fight. But the first one was a draw, even though Tyson did box him up a little bit. But we'll see. I'd like to see the Anthony Joshua fight though. And now moving on to UFC Auckland. And man, this was an emotional one. It really was. I don't normally get emotional at anything, really. I'm a pretty emotionless guy, but Paul Felder pulled at my heartstrings a little bit. Not gonna lie, he did. Let's talk about it. So Dan Hooker beat Paul Felder by split decision at UFC Auckland in the main event, 5 rounds, and I have a lot to say about this fight. I'm big on narratives, and the narrative of this fight was two guys who didn't particularly like each other. I think they did respect each other, but by the end of it, we got to a point where I think they had so much respect for each other that they almost became friends in a way, and that's a weird thing to say, but I'll explain what I mean. So at the stare down before the fight, which is one of my favourite things, where the two guys come face to face and they get to stare each other down for one last time. I love that shit. And on that stare down, the referee normally gives them an option. Do you want to touch gloves or no? And then go back to your corner. Paul Felder put out his glove. Dan Hooker said no, which I have no problem with. It's all business until they finish the fight. And then the fight starts. And then the next piece of the narrative came, which was, what was Paul Felder gonna do with the low calf kicks? Because right from the beginning, Dan Hooker was smashing into Paul Felder's calf with those big leg kicks, and those are extremely damaging. And Paul Felder had to make a decision. Was he going to play defensive and try to defend those leg kicks, or was he going to continue to be offensive, which is normally his game plan, and push forward and try to land his own strikes? And of course you can do a little bit of both, and you can try be defensively sound while taking your moments to be aggressive. But Paul Felder decided, I'm going to be aggressive, I'm going to walk through these calf kicks. And I spoke about this exact thing in my preview for this card, where Dan Hooker will play the matador. He will play on the outside. He will be defensive because he's a little bit slicker than Paul Felder as a counter striker, and that's exactly what Dan Hooker done. And this created a battle of range in round 1. Hooker wanted to stay on the outside, Felder wanted to get close. And while I didn't necessarily try score this fight because I was enjoying it so much, I did give this round to Dan Hooker. And then coming out from the corner into the second round, it didn't look great for Paul Felder because his right eye was starting to close and swell up. But then in round 2, we saw Felder land some more effective strikes than in round 1, but Hooker was still playing the matador and playing it very effectively, and he was actually fighting similar to how I thought Tyson Fury would have fought against Deontay Wilder, but of course we didn't see that. Also, midway through round 2, something that we got was a little bit of insight into Paul Felder's game plan, at least the one his corner wanted him to employ, because they showed Duke and the rest of the team in Paul's corner and they were calling for volume and combinations, which makes sense because if you look at how Dan Hooker fights, if you let him dictate the range and you only throw single strikes and get predictable, that guy can catch you with some devastating shots like those high knees that he likes to throw, or else the no-tail right straight. And I think Felder did listen to his corner, because in that round he starts smashing into Hooker's legs with leg kicks, similar to what happened to him in the first round. And this was excellent because what does that do? Yes, the easy answer is it hurts, of course, but in terms of its efficacy in this fight, it really slowed down Hooker's movement and made him have to make a big decision. With a compromised leg, you can't really play the matador like you did in the first round, at least not as effectively. So Hooker, to stay offensive, he had to step into the pocket. He had to engage into a game that Paul Felder wanted, which was a firefight, because the mobility just isn't there to continue to fight off the back foot as well as you did. And that's what happened, and this is when Paul Felder started to make his way into the fight. Now, I'm not saying he won that round for sure. I'm not saying he started to take over, but he was scoring more points and causing more damage at the very least. If you can go back and watch, check out round 3, because this is where I thought Dan Hooker showed one of his bigger strengths, which was his jab, and also that no-tail right hand I spoke about. The jab is interesting because he throws it similar to like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think he's better at it, but the reason why I say that is because he keeps his hands very, very low, not up like a traditional boxer, and that jab comes from a strange angle, and it's also lightning quick, but yeah, phenomenal, great work. And then round 4 is where the emotions took hold. And as I said, I'm not an emotional guy. Actually, I'm quite emotionless. At least that's what my girlfriend tells me. But this really got me. So if you go back and look, Duke Rufus in Felder's corner turned to Felder and said, "We're doing this for your daughter." And of course, Felder has a 4-year-old daughter, and you could see when Felder came out in round 4, he was almost a changed man. It's not that Felder was fighting poorly beforehand, but you could see in round 4 he was really being aggressive and really looking for the finish, and you could see the emotion in both his face and even his actions. His desire to win coming into round 4 was actually palpable, and he showed some great skills here as well. Sometimes I think we underestimate Paul Felder's skills because he's such a gritty fighter, but if you look at the counter right hand that he was landing on Hooker, it was beautiful. He was consistently making Hooker pay when he was retracting his jab, and I thought that was phenomenal. And then we saw something similar from Duke Rufus in Felder's corner coming into round 5 again, calling back to Felder's daughter, and then Felder came out looking so aggressive and so passionate. And man, it was just emotional. It was emotional. And I don't even like kids. But anyway, remember earlier when I said I loved narratives in fights? This is where the arc of this fight came, because in round 5, Hooker and Felder both embraced with a glove touch. Of course, coming into the fight, there was a bit of bad blood. And also Hooker, during the stare down, didn't give a glove touch. So you could see the respect that each guy earned after 4 rounds of struggle. And then right at the end of this round, the big moment came where Hooker landed a great takedown, and he was sort of stalling on top, but you could see in Paul Felder's face that he knew what he needed to do, and you could also see in his actions. This was round 5 after a grueling fight, and Felder was trying to get to his feet, and Hooker was trying to keep him down to try secure this round. And it's these kinds of moments in MMA that just get me because the struggle is there. These guys are fighting tooth and nail. It was fucking beautiful. It really was. It was beautiful. Then there was a great scramble and Hooker landed on top, and that might have been where he secured the fight, because on one judge's scorecard he was given the 5th round, and maybe if Felder could have finished the round on his feet, maybe that judge would have went the other way. But what a fight. It was really close. As I said at the beginning, I didn't really score this one because I was enjoying it so much, but robbery? No. Did Felder win? Maybe. Did Hooker win? Maybe. Loved the fight. And then 2 big moments happened afterwards. I'll start with the one that happened with Hooker. Hooker was asked did he want to fight anybody. He said Justin Gaethje. Hooker's a madman, and I love that fight. Let's do it. And then of course the bigger one, Paul Felder, really emotional with Dan Hardy, said that this might be his last fight. And I'm really conflicted on this one, because on one hand, do I think that Paul Felder needs to retire? Absolutely not. And by that I mean, does he need to retire because of his skills? No. That was a championship level performance by both guys. And it shows how deep the lightweight division is in the UFC and MMA, when 2 guys who aren't even ranked in the top 5 can go in there and put on a performance worthy of a championship fight, because that's what that was. But then on the other hand, when talking about Paul Felder's potential retirement, I think he should just do what's right for his family. He was so emotional when talking about the amount of time he needs to take away from seeing his 4-year-old daughter when in training camp. And if he feels like fighting just isn't worth it, just isn't worth taking that time away, the damage that he's taken over the years, the damage that he's taken in this fight, if he thinks that it's not worth it, then I say retire. Not because I think he has to, but if he thinks it's the right thing, I think he should retire. I don't think he should stick around because fans want to see him continue to fight, even though I would love to see that rematch selfishly. But yeah, what a night for combat sports in general. Great night for boxing, great night for MMA, and yeah, thanks for watching this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know if you want to see more of this kind of thing, and yeah, tune in on Thursday for the podcast. I'll see you soon. Oh, and one more thing. Tyson Fury, please box a boxer. I don't want to see you versus Francis Ngannou. Anthony Joshua is waiting. Go get him.